information. I think the best, the most factual. It's easy to understand because I'm kind of a simple guy. I can't explain complicated things. But as we went forward with the Pickens plan, did we have success? We did, because of 2 million people for one reason, and did we have some things that didn't go quite right? We did. We didn't get any legislation passed, and but we did get a vote, and it was a strange vote. I learned every time I go to Washington, I learn something. Most of it, I'm disappointed in what I learned. This, I was disappointed. We had an amendment in the Senate. The amendment was they were gonna vote to go on the transportation bill. So the first vote, this was a surprise, that was put before the Senate, is heavy-duty truck transportation and fueling. Is it germane to the transportation bill? To me, it was simple. Hell, yes, it is. Trucks, transportation, goes together. No. Senate voted no. It was not germane. What did that mean? It meant now I had to have 60 votes instead of 51. What it told me, the Senate has no backbone. They wanted an excuse for this to fail, and it did fail. I got 51 votes. Interesting, I got 45 Democrats and 6 Republicans. That was a real shock to this Republican, I can tell you. Harry Reid called me up and he said, "Boone, I hate to tell you this, but you let me down." I said, "How could you characterize it any other way? I'm supposed to show up with a hell of a lot more than 6 votes." I'll tell you what, it made life for me a lot cheaper. I'll tell you, when they called me, I said, just a second, I was looking here. On the Natural Gas Act, well, you voted against me. That's the way I start.
Well, you know, Boone, I remember running into Tim Wirth in New York, and he was telling me about that time, I think it was when President Obama got elected, that we needed to have natural gas as a bridge fuel that's 40% cleaner than coal to have a chance of alleviating some of the effects of burning the dirtier fuel. So let's talk about that a little bit in terms of...
Well, I want to bring you forward on a point. You may be going to that point right now.
Okay, but go ahead. I want to get to that part of it's fiscally irresponsible to buy
exactly.
Fuel that's more expensive and dirty.
I was headed there.
Oh,
okay. Yeah, it's interesting that here you have the government, and you have the cleaner, cheaper fuel is a domestic fuel, and the government doesn't. They could very easily, from a fiscal standpoint, say, buying fuel especially for federal vehicles, that you buy the cheaper, cleaner fuel. Well, that makes it easy then. It's natural gas because it's half the price of diesel and 30% cleaner. So you don't even have to think about what you buy. No direction from the government for that. But the government is peculiar on energy, and I have come to the conclusion they don't understand it. They really do not understand it. They get pieces of it, and sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they get it wrong. But if you notice, and I'm going to take you back because I'm real old, and so you'll just have to take my word for this, that the first candidate for president was Richard Nixon, that said, "Elect me and we'll be energy independent." And from there forward, I'm not kidding you, all of them have said that. Now, Obama was a little different. He said in 10 years we will not import any oil from the Mideast. He didn't say we'd be energy independent, but that to me, he felt like that was the case because that was where we reached peak production in 1970 in the United States, 10 million barrels a day. Today we're producing 8.5 million. We may go back to 10 million barrels a day, and I saw where Scott Sheffield with Pioneer Natural Resources, smart guy said we'd go to 14 million barrels a day. So now you're looking at, this rebirth of the industry in the United States and that, numbers are getting pretty high. But I think you could very well go back to the highest point, 1970. After 1970, we declined to 4.5 million barrels, and we have come back from there. But the government, I don't think, fully understands. They say, elect me and we'll be energy independent, and then when we go forward, they never mention it again. And I don't understand why the media says to them, you said on this date we were going to be energy independent if we elected you. How are you coming on the project? Nobody, the media, so then you think, does the media understand? Probably not. And so the energy industry sits there. This is dangerous to say. Do we have the press here?
Yes.
Don't quote me on this one because it'll make the guy mad. He is not good to have mad at you. But Bill O'Reilly, he kept saying that Exxon set the price for gasoline, which is ridiculous. Exxon does not set the price for gasoline. All these Exxon stations you see have been sold. Exxon doesn't even operate those stations anymore. The name is there. They were sold, and the name is used continually. It's a good name. But no, Exxon does not set the price for gasoline. And I told him, I said, quit saying that because it is, if anybody ever sat down and if you'd allow them to debate you, you would lose because that's not, the gasoline price is pretty well set by OPEC, is who it is. And they set the price for oil, which then determines the price for gasoline. But anyway, I've gotten off where you want me to go.
Well, I wanted to talk about the natural gas highway because I know the Pickens plan really has been a champion of the conversion of the 5 million big rigs that move our goods and services around America, and that they're burning some very dirty diesel, and that they could be replaced very quickly because I think these trucks wear out in about 5 years with new vehicles that burn on natural gas and can power them up and down these highways of America.
Well, you're moving in that direction, and you do have the natural gas highway in place. So if you got in, your truck on the West Coast and drove to the East Coast on I-40, I-10, well, you would have natural gas stations to fuel your truck across. The 5 million trucks you're talking about do not cross the country, you know that. That 70% of those 5 million trucks are operating in a regional pattern. How many cross the United States? About 15% that are driving clear across the country. And so, I hope you're getting ready to get a question on railroads.
I am.
Yeah, okay, I won't preempt that, but the highway is in place. They're ready to do it. And if the government, if they would say, the way to do it is to say we'll give you a tax credit for the incremental difference between the natural gas engine and the diesel engine, which is about $30,000. Then you can get a pay for off a user pay just like you would the toll road. So it's a tax credit with a pay for, and all of that could go like that if the missing link in Washington is leadership. So.
Well, I hear that. We're going to get there, but let's talk about the locomotives in the U.S. and liquid natural gas running. I think Burlington Northern is getting focused and trying to get some leadership from Washington.
Yeah, Matt Rose is their CEO. He told me that he said we're going to go to natural gas because it's so much cheaper. But we have to get cleared with it's the FRA, the Federal Railway Administration. And they have to be comfortable that the fuel is safe and everything else, especially because they've had those couple of bad accidents. One's up there in Quebec and the other one's in the United States on railroad, and had the oil, you remember, and had some lost number of people up in Quebec. But that has to be cleared up that it's safe for everybody and all to be using natural gas as a transportation fuel for the railroad. They will not let the railroads transport LNG. That's a no-no. I don't know why, but they don't. But the other company that they're all watching BNSF. I mean, the UP, Norfolk and Southern, all of them are watching them because whatever BNSF does, the rest of the railroads will do. In Canada, the Canadian National Railroad has ordered 6 tenders for their locomotives, but they've moved beyond the test stage, the CNR has. And that's a big railroad. And so when the BNSF decides to go with the LNG, then the trucks have to go because they're competing, and the fuel is half the price.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, it's a lot cleaner, and I think that's a good move for us to get our transportation sector onto a fuel that's 50% cleaner. Now, listen, Boone, I'm going to end this section at this point.
Don't end it yet. Let me make a point.
Okay, go ahead.
Right quick. Okay, I've had impeccable direction. I know where I'm going, and I know where I'm going to be, and so my direction has been good. It was good on wind. I was early. It was good on natural gas for transportation fuel. In 1988, I made a speech, and I said, I am going to get this country to use natural gas for transportation fuel. I said, it's cleaner, it's cheaper, and it's ours. It's domestic, and we will get off OPEC oil. I said, I can accomplish, if I have something that good going for my product that I'm selling, I can sell it in 3 years. That speech was made in 1988. Now, my timing is questionable. My direction is perfect.
And it seems like we're heading there. Now, don't move an inch. We're just going to invite a couple more guys to join us up here and get into we're going to expand the conversation into water and some best practices. So if, Bill, if you would introduce.
So we're going to be joined by Riggs Eckelberry of Origin Oil, Inc., and David Trickett of the Jefferson Circle. Please come up and join the conversation to expand it.
Thank you. So while they're moving the chairs in here, now why don't you just sit back?
I don't shake hands with them.
Oh, okay.
I don't shake hands.
I didn't want you to leave the stage yet, though.
I'm not leaving. You can't run me off. David.
Hello again.
Good. Hello again.
Mr. Pickens.
Rick. Boone Pickens. Yeah, call me Boone.
Thank you, sir.
Great. So let's get right on to it. Riggs Eckelberry has a company called Origin Oil, and they've come up with a very unique technology that basically takes the 5 million gallons per well that we drill. And I'm going to say that we have about 100,000 wells in the state of Colorado. I'm probably off a little bit, but pretty close. And a lot of them have been drilled in the last 8 or 10 years, some of them right over here in Rifle, Colorado, near where we live. And we use about 5 million gallons, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, per well. And then apparently that water comes back out, and it's full of heavy metals and all kinds of stuff. And it gets carted off at about $8 a barrel. Is that right?
It varies by region, but it's expensive.
Okay. So your technology basically takes that water, removes those metals, et cetera, and then they reuse it. Is that right?
Right. So there's, of course, a range of options. Sometimes in Colorado, it's got to be returned to fully potable, or it can be cleaned up to the level that it can be reused in the next frac job, for example. And so theoretically, especially if you're getting water coming out of the formation, you can actually make that well independent of outside water supplies, because as you know, there's often plentiful water that comes out of the aquifers as well. Now, I have a presentation I thought I would make to
When you say out of the aquifer.
out of formation. Thank you.
Well, on that issue of 5 million gallons per well in a water-constrained West, where drought is upon us in California, et cetera, it seems like a pretty good idea to try to conserve as much water as we can.
Exactly, and there's some very good work done by CERES, the research organization around climate change that I was able to gather, and I wonder if I could take a moment and run a couple slides.
Well, it depends on how much.
It's going to be quick.
Okay, good.
So, is this my clicker? No.
So we can look at that.
Do we have a clicker? May I have
When you were talking about conserving water, you know, Karshner just said, Andy did, was talking about how much of our energy that we lose. And when you look around, pardon me for interrupting
Sure.
you, but I mean, it's a good idea to conserve everything, all resources. I mean, that shouldn't be axiomatic.
Well, the reason I bring it up, and I think that David can speak to this, is there's, I think, a lot of friction between the parties around this fracking issue. And people tend to dig in on their various positions and so forth. And it's our position that, and I'm going to quickly go through these slides because I know you're time constrained.
We're tight.
And that if we can, if the oil industry can address this proactively, there's going to actually be perhaps a lowering of the temperature and the ability to work together. So let me just run through it quickly. Sure. As you may know, the Hoover Dam has been dropping down. Boone, right there in front of you, there's a monitor.
Oh,
We
here.
have a monitor.
Okay.
This is just in 1 year. Now, here's what it looks like. That's in June 16, 2013, and this is just 1 year later. So you have this.
Are you fracking out of that?
Oh, no, this is just to show where the Colorado watershed's going.
Okay.
So thank God we're not fracking out of Lake Mead. But so what we have here is a 13-month drop, and of course it's from a low level already. So there's clearly troubles with the Colorado watershed, and the Ogallala, as you know, Boone, is threatened as well because there's the big drought of 2012, and it has not been alleviated. We have parts of the Ogallala that are getting quite low, and it is not recharging fast enough. So groundwater is an issue in the West, but also in the Midwest. Now, here's the interesting slide by CERES, where they show that so many of our fracking operations are in stressed environments. A stressed environment is one that already has 80% of the water being used for other uses, so it makes for competition. So fracking is competing in these various areas with other users, and many of these areas, like the gray ones, are arid to start with. So I recommend that you go to ceres.com/shale map, which is an interactive map. It's really, really good. Okay, now, we also know that overall fracking use is low. As a percentile, here's Colorado, and it shows that hydraulic fracturing is 0.08% of total use, agriculture being the biggest at 85%. Now, the issue...
Does that take in metropolitan?
It's Colorado overall, yes, sir. Now, here's the issue, and we see this in Texas. Local stress can be very high. We have Karnes, for example, 213% proportion of fracturing used to domestic. We have in Erie County, small population, of course, but they're at almost 3,000%. So this can create local stresses, and why is this important? Well, there's people live there, and they get concerned. Texas is pro-fracking, of course, but I think we have to be mindful of the stresses on the population. And here's another one, where populations are growing in the arid regions. All these circled areas are major growth areas for population in the very same areas.
And you know why they're growing?
Well, they're growing because it's a great climate, for starters.
It's growing because the oil and gas
And
in
that too.
those areas are so active and employing so many people.
It's a very good point.
You've been to Midland, Texas lately. You wouldn't believe it if you hadn't been there in 10 years.
Well, we have an office in Houston, and I agree that Texas is doing very well. But, for example, California, which has not yet had a fracking boom, is growing. The point is, fracking is a boom, but so is, the weather in Florida, the weather in California. These people are migrating to nice places.
That's right.
Okay, now, this is the point. If you have a growing population and stressed aquifers, fracking operators are under what I call a perfect storm, right? It's a PR situation that they have to recognize. And our experience at Origin Oil has been that operators would just rather it just go away. So it's not going to. I think we need to be proactive. All right, so the good news is, and this is my last 2 slides, recycling with a whole new generation of technologies like ours is becoming chemical-free and much more efficient. We can save on truck trips. There's excess water that can be piped to farmers. It's happening in the Imperial Valley right now, where Chevron is piping water into that's not regulated Colorado water. And finally, there's more and more waterless fracking, which can do about 1/3 of the job. And there's savings available. This is a spreadsheet which you can get from our company, which, depending on the scenario, you can save a lot of money on your water if you recycle. That's a win-win. Conclusion is, of course, is that we can dramatically mitigate the perceived impact of fracking on stressed water supplies with these proactive measures, and that's my point.
Okay, thanks, Riggs. And
Okay, what's the name of your company that we buy?
Origin Oil,
Okay, what's the symbol?
OOIL. Thank you.
What's it selling for?
Oh, we're a microcap. We're a microcap. We're a microcap, and we're a technology company, so we're freely licensing our technology to all comers. We're kind of like Android versus iOS. You know, you don't have to buy the platform. You can have the technology and pay for it on the back end.
Okay.
there you go. So we have to have these kinds of strategies because natural gas is not only upon us, it's being actively produced all over the United States, from the Marcellus back east to right here in Rifle, up in Wyoming, Montana, and North Dakota, et cetera. Now I want to get over to David here because he's been working with, I believe, with the state of Colorado and sort of having that position as being the former president of Iliff School of Theology. He's been asked to kind of step up and sort of mediate some of this dialogue, which has become very contentious between the pro-gas and the anti-fracking people. So can you just give us an update on your work and where that's happening?
I want you all to watch Chip because I have an hour and 53-minute movie to show. It is actually relevant. I'm not going to show it, but I'm going to make reference. And I'm very serious here. It is called Malta's Story. It's a 1953 British film. It deals with the resistance of Malta and the contribution that resistance and the Allied forces made to stopping Rommel at El Alamein. And the issue here is, in that film, you will see an astonishing alignment of aspiration and courage, which is something that I find largely invisible today among most parties addressing these matters. And to get to Chip's issue, I am kind of more like Forrest Gump, truthfully, because I am present in some conversations, but I have absolutely no visible, measurable contribution, except some people after the fact say, gosh, that was an interesting idea. What I see going on that is most important, that isn't just a Colorado issue by a long shot, is a lack of trust among all parties. I find that facts are being marshaled. Facts may be actually really useful, but when people do not trust one another's facts, the contribution of facts to addressing important issues is largely minimized. And we have to find a way both to develop trust across warring lines. It's quite like what happens in any hot war situation. If diplomacy is going to work, people actually have to have a nascent development of trust for one another. Otherwise, facts will be viewed with suspicion. And I certainly think that's part of what we have going on today.
Do you think that's what's happening with in Gaza and Israelis right now?
Oh, they're absolutely. Are you kidding? But we're just doing it without the missiles.
They don't. Do you think they trust each other?
Little.
Yeah, none.
But,
zero.
and you know this, I'm sorry, I lived 20 years in Washington, D.C. before I moved here to cleaner air some 8+ years ago. And one of the things I've noticed, even in the 20 years I was there, and certainly the 8 or so I've been not there, is that increasingly we have real characterizations of what's going on with our national political leadership, particularly both major parties in both houses of Congress, rather like what happens if any of you ever watch Alpha House, raise your hand. House of Cards, raise your hand. That actually is quite real, and it's scary. And it's in part because there is precious little community across ideological fissure lines that we see going on today. People used to be able to negotiate where they differed profoundly on principle because they actually had a relationship, sometimes fostered when they were members of Congress, by spouses and children who brought them together. That is largely invisible now, and we're missing something about the civic framework from which trust comes, from which effective negotiations develop.
Well, that's an interesting place, I think, to segue to part of what I wanted to talk about with you gentlemen today, and that's building the trust through something we call best practices. And that means getting our gas and oil and coal, which we all use, no matter what side of the coin you come down on. We're heating and cooling our homes, and we're driving our vehicles, and we use this. And so to get to that point of building trust in terms of how we can go into communities with the extractive industries and bring out the fuel in ways that adhere to the highest standards possible. So maybe, Boone, you want to jump in on that in terms of?
Yeah, you know, I had the pleasure of being at Ted Turner's ranch, Montana, 2 weeks ago, and Les Brown was there. Is Les here?
I think Ted is and Les are there.
Okay. And we had a great discussion evening. The outcome of it was that we exchanged ideas, and Les and Ted are, they don't like fossil fuels. And so as we talked, and one came, and I made my point that there was 92 million barrels every day produced in the world, and 70% of that went to transportation fuel. And I went a little further, and I said, and Les responded, but he didn't respond to what I said. And I said, Les, I don't think you pay any attention to what I say. And he said, I don't. And at the
that one, though.
at the conclusion, I said, Ted, you don't want fossil fuels. I said, what happens if you cut off fossil fuels tomorrow? Ted said, everybody walks. So that was my evening with Les and Ted.
Well, I think they were saying that exercise is good for us.
Sure it is. It's good for it. I worked out this morning.
But to the point of rigs technology and the fact that we can improve, you know, Colorado has passed some very good regulations lately about methane emissions at wellhead and minimizing the impact. I think there's 500 truck trips in and out of the pads when they do the drilling. And even though they're out of there, once they get the well in place and it's operational, there is some impacts, and there's and some real effects on the communities, you know, surrounding, you know, what's happening. And so we want to try to do this, obviously, at the highest standards. And so is there any kind of way or advice that you can give us from the Pickens plan and from your years of being in the field where we can sort of raise that standard from the little wildcatters up to the biggest corporations that are doing most of the activity?
Sure. And I have been in the field a long time. I've probably been responsible for and witnessed, I don't know how many, but maybe 2,000 wells being fracked. And I do not have one failure of a frack job as to whether you put water out of the producing zone and got it up in the aquifer. The aquifer isn't every place, you know that. I mean, there's some places around the United States that don't have aquifers. But I don't know of any case where you messed up an aquifer with fracking a well. And people keep talking about that, and I keep saying, well, give me one example. They never have given me one example. Now, I made a speech at Williamsport, Pennsylvania. This was 2 or 3 years ago, and they're getting into the development of the Marcellus and the Utica formations up there. And somebody got up and said, well, I know of a case where Chesapeake had a failure of a line on flowback, and it came back a lot of salt water out of the formation, and it got into the creek and killed fish. And I said, well, how much water did it run in? Didn't know, but it was a lot. Well, you know, water coming out of a hose looks like a lot of water if you're in front of it. And so okay, I said, well, bear in mind, I've been in Pennsylvania in the winter, and you're the people that spread salt on the roads. And I said, so that drains off into the creeks, kills the fish, does it? And he said, that's a different kind of salt. So they've got, you know, there's answers for everything. Some of them are not good, and that one's not. Salt's salt. But I think the industry they're aware of the concern about fracking. I don't find, we fracked a well on my ranch yesterday, and that water is flow back, we get it. Now, on my ranch, I've also seen water spilled, you know, where you had a line break like Chesapeake did, and you're spraying water out on the pasture. That water doesn't bother me, honestly doesn't. And I'm very sensitive about my pastures and everything else. But it isn't enough to do any damage, that amount of water. But we take that water, and in the area we're in, we're re-injecting the water. But we let a lot, I say part of it we are. Part of it goes into a lined pit, and then it settles out, and we use the water again. It's that simple. We actually are not treating that water, and it works very well for us. But we sometimes have too much, and it goes about 10 miles and re-injected into the deal. But I think the industry, you say, well, you're an industry guy. Hell yes, I got out of school in '51, a geologist, and I've made my living ever since '51 somehow associated with the oil and gas industry. So how could you call me anything but an industry guy? But at the same time, I've been sensitive to the environment. You go back and look at my record, now I can challenge anybody in this room as what I've done for the environment. But you have to be realistic about what's going on. I mean, you have, you know, a well that has some problem with it that causes problems and everything. Well, you don't shut down the industry. It's like having an airplane accident and shutting down the airline industry. I mean, there is pilot error. I mean, it does happen, and it will happen, but not often.
Well, you know, they're telling us we got to end and have this be over, but I just wanted to thank you, Boone, and Riggs, and Dr. Trickett over here for bringing this conversation into the room. We have to have a fair and balanced conversation about energy and doing it at the most highest levels of sustainability, and that, of course, is best practices, and I think you just talked to that.
Yeah, and this is good. I mean, I had a person say, well, you're not going to go up there and talk to all those greenies in Aspen, are you? Hell, I'm a greenie.
Oh, greenies, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm a greenie. I mean, I'll qualify. I pass the saliva test for greenies. And so, sure, but I'm also realize that the oil and gas industry has to operate in the United States. And don't forget, 70% of all the oil that is produced every day goes to transportation fuel. So if you want to get off of it, it is going to take some time to do it. It won't be some movement that takes place and in 2 years they shut it down. No, it's not going to work that way. But sure, I think these kind of meetings, and I love to come. I've been here every year, I don't know, for the last 25 or 30, maybe 50 years. No, it's only been.
So with that, I think we're going to conclude the panel.
I'm going to make one comment. Juxtaposition of image, the Walton family, Crystal Bridges Art Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas, go see it. Rosie the Riveter, which they own, and Kindred Spirits by Asher Durand, which they own. Realize that each of those images, you can do Google searches, must somehow find a way to be together for an energy future.
I agree.
Thank you.
That's the final note.
So David and Riggs, if you'd step off, Boone, if you just hold tight a minute, we have a little presentation for you. Sally?
Well, we have, as you know, we have a series of Our Day awards every year. And Boone can't be here tomorrow at our awards ceremony that I hope all of you will attend, so we're giving him his today. And it's the Transition Pioneer Award, because he really is the one. He is the one who started talking about transition. He is the one that said, let's move into a cleaner energy future. Where that goes, we don't know yet, but this has been a very enlightening panel about natural gas, and it is here, and he's got all the new 18-wheelers on natural gas. They can't go on batteries. They can't do it.
Tell them why.
So,
Don't tell 'em why, but-
you tell him why.
Well, you can't. 18-wheelers, you can't move them on a battery. And I have people say, well, you got to cut out that natural gas. Well, then we're a lot better off with natural gas and diesel, and someday maybe we get to a battery. But today, batteries won't do it.
So the transition pioneer right here, please give him a hand.
Now, where are you going to place that, Boone? Are you going to put that on your mantle and tell your oil and gas friends that's from the Greenies in Aspen?
I'm very proud of this, and I say that, of course, honestly. But it'll be in my office. It's where it'll be, and it'll probably be on my desk.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Well deserved. Thank you. So our next presenter with keynote remarks is Dipna van der Lans. She's with the Climate Initiative. It's the Clinton Climate Initiative. The Clinton Global Initiative just came to Colorado this last June. Coming back next June, we're really excited. I had an opportunity to meet Dipna, had an opportunity to meet her along with President Hillary Clinton, and she's fantastic in the energy world. She has a long resume. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. She oversees the Clinton Global Initiatives Foundation's climate and energy programs. Prior to that, she served as Senior Director for Public Policy Programs at the German Marshall Fund. Before the GMF, she was the Director of Global Renewables Infrastructure and Energy Efficiency as a specialist investment banking firm in London, and she was also BP's Alternative Energy Director of Distributed Energy Markets, and the Department of Energy selected her as one of its inaugural ambassadors of its Clean Energy Education and Empowerment Initiative. Please welcome Dipna van der Lans. Dipna?
Thank you. Well, it's a great honor to be here today, spend time with you. It's a hard panel to follow. I will say immediately that I'm excited about the next panel, if only for the fact that it's filled with women. And I just noticed that as I was waiting to be called up to the panel, just how different it is to sit with a group of women at one table. It just immediately felt different to me. We were introducing each other and talking about other things, and it was just really wonderful. And I think it really highlights some of the things that I'm going to talk about today as well. So I'm delighted to be here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I wanted to thank Chip, where's Chip, for inviting me here today and to speak. I also want to thank the other speakers and the summit participants, so you, for your presence here and your thoughtful insights thus far. I would also like to acknowledge President Carter, who I think just arrived, and thank him for his dedication and consistent work in promoting clean energy and women leadership. President Carter has been a visionary in thinking about the role of clean energy and America's need to transition to a more sustainable future. He has also tirelessly championed women's rights and women's leadership, and I'm honored to be in his presence today. A friend suggested I would start my talk today by telling a personal anecdote, a story, that explains how I came to be standing here before you today as the CEO of the Clinton Climate Initiative. And so I begin to think back about my childhood, wondering at what point I became what I would call a systems thinker. Was there an aha moment? Did something happen in my life that led me here to tackling the complex problem of climate change? And so I'm a very reflective person, very introverted. And I do most of my thinking when I go for a long walk. So I went for a long walk in the forest and just couldn't come up with anything. Then I decided to call a friend of mine who's known me for the last 30 years and asked her why She thought that I was a good systems thinker. She didn't have anything either. And then I finally called my mother, who's been just a wonderful woman, obviously, in my life since the moment I was born. And I asked her, when did you look at me and think, she is going to be one great systems thinker? Her answer was obviously never. What I came to realize through the process was that I was very lucky. I didn't have to have an aha moment. Instead, I was raised by systems thinkers. As you can probably tell from either my height or the color of my hair, the fact that I'm wearing orange and my funny accent and name, I am not from the United States. I'm from a tiny country called the Netherlands. And so in this small country where everything and everyone is so incredibly close together, there's no way that anybody in our country could make a decision about anything else without thinking about the consequences. And so in the Netherlands, where there is no wilderness, just like you have here in this wonderful state of Colorado, very, very little land and almost no space. As a matter of fact, we have the most densely populated square kilometer in the world. Not only are we the tallest people in the world, we also live really close together. Everyone lives basically next door or downstream from each other. And therefore, we have to be very, very thoughtful about our resources and about each other. We have very, very tight feedback loops. When I was a child, I spent every night after dinner sorting the recycling. I never let the water run. Once I tried to play my favorite Rolling Stones song very loudly in my room. I tried to be rebellious when I was 14, but I only did this once because there's an instant feedback loop that basically says you will never do this again. And so when you grow up in a country that is so close and so tight, you cannot help, I think, but becoming a systems thinker, because you always think through the consequences of your actions. And if you're raised well by your parents, you think through the unintended consequences of those actions as well. In the Netherlands, where land is scarce, and as you know, water is everywhere, we cannot do anything without thinking about these decisions. And thus I grew up surrounded with a deep appreciation for systems, feedback loops, and the interdependencies in our lives. Perhaps you understand intuitively what I mean by systems thinking, but let me take a moment to provide a definition. A system is any interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves an outcome. The world is made up of systems. A tree is a system, a forest is a system, a conference is a system, and I'm a system. Systems are often embedded in larger systems, which are embedded in yet larger systems. The Earth's climate is a system comprised of the subsystems of the atmosphere, our oceans, the land, and human society. Systems thinking views outcomes as the result of the interactions between the various elements of a system. I see it as an inherently dynamic, complex, and often non-linear view of the world. Most importantly, systems thinking recognizes that systems often contain within them the causes of their own success and this is very critical, the causes of their own failures. Systems problems are problems that have their origins in the interactions of the elements of a system. They are characterized by a high degree of interconnections and interdependencies with other variables around them. John Muir succinctly described this when he said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." Climate change may very well be the most complex systems problem that we have ever encountered. The roots of the problem lie in the very structure of our society. Consider that in our modern economy, almost every single human activity is linked to the use of fossil fuels and other sources of climate-altering greenhouse gases. Every time we buy or even download a book, every time we cook a meal, every time we travel across town, we're impacting the climate. At the very same time, almost everything that sustains and enriches our lives is affected, directly or indirectly, by the changing climate. Access to clean water, as the people were just previously talking about as well, the price of our food, national security, the health of ourselves and our loved ones, economic opportunity for this generation and generations to come, all of it is placed in jeopardy by climate change. Up until now, society has mostly been able to adjust to climate variations, partly because the variations have been low and partly because the risks seemed manageable. But as we all know, pressures are rising and the risks posed by climate change are increasing dramatically. If the question is, what is impacted by climate change? The answer must be everything and everyone. As Secretary Clinton often says, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child, but it also takes a village to protect and sustain the world that child is going to raise up in or grow up in. Indeed, it takes the village to create system solutions, because the entire village both impacts and is impacted by the system. When a problem arises from a network of interdependent variables, solutions will fail unless they address the larger network. A forest conservation plan that preserves tree cover at the expense of sustainable livelihoods will ultimately fail. A clean energy technology that is installed without a plan for training personnel to maintain and operate the technology will ultimately fail. A policy that provides incentives to adapt new behaviors to reduce energy consumption must remain in place long enough for the new behaviors to become ingrained habits, or it too will ultimately fail. We must insist on solving more than one problem at a time, which is very, very difficult to do. We must insist on tackling multiple interrelated challenges at the very same time. We need the resolve to address systems rather than symptoms. A solution will not be effective or enduring if it creates new problems. And so we need new business models, new technologies, new policy frameworks, and most importantly, new ways of engaging with each other. In order for a solution to be adopted quickly and taken to scale, it must address people's fundamental needs and desires in a way that is sufficiently superior to traditional alternatives. This requires a deep understanding of what those needs and desires are and how they are served by the current system. The Clinton Climate Initiative does exactly that, as we're moving away from focusing on single technologies to using a whole systems approach. We collaborate with world-class partners to increase the resiliency of communities facing climate change and to create replicable and sustainable models for others to follow. At the core of our engagement philosophy is systems thinking. Identifying and activating leverage points that can create significant positive impacts in climate change mitigation and energy transition for communities around the world. The challenge before us may seem daunting, but looking around this room, I'm pleased to see such great intellect, creativity, and passion collectively working towards a transition to a cleaner energy future. Such an energy revolution requires extensive human capital. In order to succeed, we need all of humanity, not just half of it, to be contributing to the solutions. Currently, substantially less than half of the clean energy workforce is made up of women, and that's especially true if you get to the top. It is unfortunately true across all of the clean energy fields, from science and technology to policy, finance, and business development. Within the US energy sector, GMA Ratings, a research firm, found that 61% of corporate boards still have no female representation at all. If we are to fully harness our potential as a society, we need to bring more systems thinkers into the mix. Women should be part of the discussion about the future of the smart grid, the future of wind, solar, bioenergy, and sustainable transportation. We should be part of the discussion about how we design better electric vehicles, smarter storage, and more efficient appliances. I'm personally always deeply inspired by the emerging talent that I see around me. Women who passionately aim to change our energy and climate system. Young women like Tessa Paganini and Jean Choi, who's with me here today, both from the United States, who have worked with me closely over the last couple of years and who seek to change the way we think and speak about energy transition, creating a space for deep inquiry and honest dialogue. Both of them always focused on the whole systems approach. However, despite these standouts, women too often are still not at the decision-making table. It's time we all recognize that diverse perspectives drive better outcomes. We should thus envision a clean energy transition that celebrates and empowers women in leadership roles as crucial decision makers, thought leaders, visionaries, and systems thinkers. As a young woman in the Netherlands, I dreamed of becoming the first female ambassador in China. And as I left my country to study Chinese and become a fluent Mandarin speaker, I studied economics at and law at Beijing University. It was there that I decided to focus my efforts on the environment, on climate change, and on the role energy plays in the transition. It was there that I started to truly apply systems thinking, understanding that what applied to my small country applied equally to a vast country, like China or the United States. It was there that I started to understand that if we are to have any hope of altering systems outcomes in an enduring way, then we must approach the system as a whole, involving everyone in that system. 100 years ago, when we developed coal, oil, and gas, we had no idea it would contribute to the droughts we see in Colorado and across the West today, or in the sea level rises that we see impacting small island nations in the Pacific and the Caribbean. It is so difficult to do the right thing without tight, powerful feedback loops that show us direct, immediate outcomes. The challenge before us today is to remember that there's always someone next door or downstream, just like when I was growing up in the Netherlands. We must work together, men and women, to ingrain systems thinking into our everyday lives and the lives of our children. Our challenge is to think bigger and to dig deeper, to find the terms of our interdependency and work together to create lasting whole system solutions to our shared future. As Albert Einstein said, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. I'm delighted to be here with you today in Aspen, and I look forward to thinking differently, systematically differently, as we work together to address the challenges of climate change. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Dipna. It's a great segue to our next panel. The panel is called Women Leading the Way. So it is moderated, the panel is by Laura Turner Seidel from the Turner Foundation and Captain Planet. She'll be joined by Sally Rainey from RDAY and a group called We Can, Osprey Orell Lake from We Can, Betsy Hall McKinney from Founding Family, and Marcy Zaroff from Eco Fashion Under the Canopy. Also, Leilani Munter, where are you, Leilani? So if you saw her last year, I'm just going to take a moment of personal privilege as they set up. Leilani's a race car driver, and her audience are NASCAR fans and race car fans. She is a carbon-free race car driver, and she'll talk a little bit about her stuff, but this is a great place, right, to have these conversations, and a lot of time we agree about 98% of the things that we talk about. Race car fans may not agree or understand with all that's said here, but having someone like Leilani who can actually reach that audience is really important. So figure out any way you can to support her in her efforts, because it's really a way to help embed this notion of a carbon-constrained future into cultures and what we might call subcultures around America, and she's doing it. So anyway, women leading the way.
Except that I'm not mic'd up, so I'm going to do my introductions from the podium. I just want to start by saying that Sally Rainey has the biggest and most loving heart of just about anybody that I know. And the dynamic duo between Chip and Sally to pull off the 11th RDAY Summit has just been incredible. It's the first time I've been here. I've been hearing great things from my dad, Ted Turner, and my husband and my son for several years, and it's just an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be on the same platform with these women who are truly trailblazers in their fields and leading the way. And I just want to start off by saying that we don't have a lot of time. I encourage you not only to check out their bios in the program, but look at their long bios. Very impressive. Many of them have done TED Talks. They've been in films. They are incredible women, and I love them all. And they're a lot of fun to work with to save the world. I just want to start with Leilani. She is a race car driver, one of 3 NASCAR race car drivers in the world. 75 million fans in NASCAR, talking about a great audience to reach out to with her message of sustainability. And actually, she will not take any sponsorships from any companies involved with animal testing oil or gas, any coal utility companies. So she would rather not race than take money from polluting industry, which is amazing. And she also believes diligently that if you're going to be an environmentalist, you need to eat less meat, and in her case, no meat. And then Osprey Oriole Lake. I think that Osprey and Sally are sisters joined at the hip because they do a lot of their great work together, including the founding of the Women's Environment and Climate Energy Initiative. They launched it a year ago. They had a summit up in upstate New York with delegates from all over the world. And Osprey's actually going to do an amazing PowerPoint presentation at the end so she can update each and every one of you of all the great work that they've been doing this past year. It's very inspiring and gives me real reasons for optimism, and I'm sure you will be just right there with me. Sally has been in this field for 45 years. She can't be that old. There's just no way. And she's done a lot of work in the nonprofit and the for-profit sector, work on energy, water, biodiversity, sustainable land initiatives, and she has actually given advice to 3 presidents, Reagan, President Carter, and President Clinton. And she's going to inspire us with why she did what she did, where we are right now. She is obviously co-founded the R-Day and the American Energy Renewable Institute, and there are a lot of amazing programs that she's going to be telling us about, and developing curricula for young people centered around climate and energy, which is really exciting to me. Then we have Marcy Zaroff, and she coined the term eco-fashion 25 years ago. And I was actually in the in women's fashion for a while, and the hemline just kept going up and down, and now it's way up, and I can't go to that bad place. But eco-fashion was supposed to be a trend, and it was really tough on the front end. I remember when she launched Under the Canopy, which made 100% organic women's wear and men's wear, T-shirts, just, you know, very high-end, high-quality merchandise. And she is going to tell us why this year has reached a tipping point in the fashion industry, and I'm just so excited for her to tell you about that. And her husband is actually co-partners with her in a wonderful nutritional health product company, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that too. I had some of it last night. I am happy. So my husband and I split it, and we were really happy last night, I have to say. And then last but not least, we've got Betsy Hall McKinney, and she has taken it upon herself to rewrite the Declaration of Independence, because she believes that the Founding Fathers got it a little wrong when they left the women and children out of the equation. So she has written the Declaration of Interdependence and how we are really interdependent on one another. And then she also has a new initiative that she just launched called the Founding Family. Instead of the Founding Fathers, we go to the Founding Family. What a novel idea. Very important. And the first initiative coming out of this enterprise is a wonderful summit, the Partnership Summit, which she is going to encourage us all to attend. I've already given it the 2 thumbs up. I will be there May 1st through 3rd in Baltimore. So without any further, oh, and Osprey, I think I introduced all of you, and because we're running behind, we're just going to dive right in. And Sally is going to, each one of you has about 4 minutes, because we got to trim it down a little bit. Okay. So Sally, why don't you tell us how you got to where we are today with the wonderful organizations that you envisioned, and why it's so important to bring in women into the conversation and youth into the conversation. And I'll let you get started.
Okay, well, first of all, really quickly, it's really an honor to be included in this panel with these women, but I also want to recognize, because I know a lot of the women in this room, and there are a lot of other women leaders out here in this room, and I want to acknowledge you as well. So a lot of people ask me, and Laura just did, how I got into all of this work. Well, it was a little unsuspecting, cattle ranching. And I was married a young rancher when I was very young. I started all this, I don't know, 44 years. Let's say I started when I was 5. But I married a rancher, and I lived on and off of a working family ranch for quite a while. And during that time, I really became connected with nature and really observed the genius of nature. And I was in awe and I was in respect, both. And there was a clear cut that was scheduled for this property that we had where our watershed was. It was about 55,000 acres where our watershed was. And there was, at that time, there was no environmental impact statement whatsoever. So I got involved with that, and make a long story short is I traded in my cowboy boots for high heels. And I ended up in Washington, D.C., lobbying on timber management programs, and eventually did stop that clear cut, and it's never been cut to this day. So in that, thank you. In that process, what I learned is that, and a principle that I firmly believe in, despite what we say about politics right now, I believe that if you work democracy, democracy works for you. And I think that part of our gridlock is that we have, those of us who really care about this issue, have not been working democracy the way it was designed that we could do that. So in my little life story, I ended up with the resource policy analyst with the Wilderness Society. I'm a serial founder, co-founder of many organizations, and just most recently is the American Renewable Energy Institute, which is now 3 years old. ARDE, the summit piece of ARDE, is 7 years old, and I'm a co-founder of that. And also a co-founder of WeCan with Oriole. And we've had Osprey, Oriole Lake, sorry. And why I went to that place with these two organizations is because I worked on biodiversity all over the world. And there was one area in the Arctic Circle that I went back to after 17 years. It's called the Tatshin-Shinny River. And some of you, it is absolutely the most wild, gorgeous place on the planet. And I'd also worked in Tierra del Fuego on 850,000 acre area with Goldman Sachs. So I was working on both, poles, if you will, the extreme north and the extreme south. And what I learned in that is that climate change, everything else is actually irrelevant to climate change, because what I observed in the Arctic Circle is all of the glaciers that made this pristine wilderness, 2.3 million acres that we got protected in 5 years of working very hard with a coalition of 53 million people. That's what we need for climate change, 53 million people in this country, working our Congress. What I learned is that we had to go to Congress. We had to go to Congress. And so in conservation biology, you learn about whole systems. And AREI is about looking at, this is why all of you are here from different sectors, looking at the integrated, the systems that we heard about, the systems approach to how we deal with climate change. And that's why there's so many people here from so many different sectors. The other thing I learned is that women, the voice of women, the potency that women can have, organized, mobilized on this issue, that potential has not really been tapped. And this is one of the reasons why we established WeCan. We work around the world, but we're also holding a summit next September in Washington, D.C. for women leaders and really looking at how we create a constituency of women in the United States to speak up about climate change. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. That was great. Betsy? Oh, Sally, by the way, we know you have to go because you have a meeting with the president and my dad, so have fun.
So I wrote a Declaration of Interdependence because, as we all know, only men had been involved in writing about independence, and now we are living in an era of interdependence. We're increasingly aware of our interdependence at every level. So I was watching a movie called Misrepresentation that Jennifer Siebel Newsom did, a documentary film. How many of you have seen the film? Yes, well, for those of you who haven't, it's about how women are underrepresented in government, how we're over-sexualized in the media, and how we're largely absent from the important debates of the day. And so I went home that night just enraged, and I took the courage to actually rewrite the Declaration because I thought, what was missing? If they didn't understand the importance of women and putting that into the document that would govern our nation, what else might not they have been aware of back then that now we are absolutely, completely aware of? And that is that we're interdependent with the health of the environment. Our democracy is interdependent with the health of our campaign and electoral systems. Our democracy is interdependence with an informed and engaged electorate. And it's critical, as I wrote in the Declaration of Interdependence, that when, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for men and women to partner as never before in human history to declare that all life is sacred and interdependent, and to declare the wisdom of using power in service to love and in service to all people and in service to all life. That's the beginning of the Declaration of Interdependence that I wrote in order to say that first and foremost, as we build a collective impact network of networks for building the political will at the grassroots and the grass tops level, women's leadership and the partnership between men and women is a fundamental prerequisite. And to your point, Dimphna, as you said earlier, in systems thinking, so many of the solution sets have to be taken on simultaneously. And so how are we now going to engage half of the population, and that being women, who are not represented at the decision-making tables in sufficient numbers? So I conceived of the notion of a brand for a people's movement that many are calling for, and that is the new founding family, with founding mothers, new founding fathers, founding youth, and founding elders, to elevate the values of interdependence, partnership, love, and compassion to actually bring true justice that the original Declaration was a promise of. So the New Founding Family is launching its first summit, the Partnership Summit, May 1st through 3rd in Baltimore, Maryland. And as a member of the Women Donors Network and as a woman philanthropist, I've had the privilege and the honor of traveling the country the past 18 months, speaking with hundreds of leaders around the country, from grassroots to grass tops, and the highest elected officials in the country, asking, what is the need for a national women's gathering? And then I asked myself the question, do we need a national women's gathering? And I realized, no, we need a national partnership summit that is to discuss the elevation of women's leadership, because men and women need to have this conversation together. How can we have a partnership summit that will elevate the women leaders who are doing amazing work right now, and also build a movement that will attract and engage the women who are not currently engaged in the country right now, so that we can use our collective voting power, use our collective purchasing power, and help mobilize the grassroots political will that I know others are going to be talking about later today. So the Partnership Summit, May 1st through 3rd, I'm happy to announce that Mayor Rawlings Blake of Baltimore has announced that this will be a host city for the event. It will be taking place at the Baltimore Convention Center. It is the promise of a partnership summit on women's leadership annually. And President Carter is not in the room right now, but I want to thank him for his leadership. In 1977, his administration was part of supporting the first National Women's Convention. We have not had a national gathering on women's leadership since that time. We need a national gathering because women's leadership is not inevitable. It is actually something that we must put all of our resources and time into as women in order to make sure that that takes place so that we are at the decision-making tables. So I want to invite you to May 1st through 3rd in Baltimore, Maryland. We have a world-class production team. It will be live streamed nationally and globally. We want to make it a national event and a statement to the country and the world that it's time, 2015, to elevate women's leadership in partnership with men.
So, Marcy, your mantra is look great, feel great. Tell us how you got to that, how you're making that happen, and why this year is a real tipping point.
So, ironically, the book that was kind of the catalyst for me, it was called Living in the Light, and I was 15 years old, and I had this epiphany that as the kid with the lemonade stand on the corner, I could leverage business as a very powerful vehicle for change and transformation. So my first business was called the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. It's known as that today. And I soon realized as I was out in agriculture that there was an interconnection between food, beauty, and fiber. We also had opened the first Aveda Concept Salon in the school. When I saw the impacts of cotton and even just down to the social ramifications as well as the environmental impacts of women who were farmers carrying pesticide tanks on their backs and having babies in slings on their fronts, and started to learn about the magnitude and multitude of chemicals and impacts to the environment, it dawned on me that there was a missing link in that whole wellness equation. So in starting my company Under the Canopy and building the movement for eco-fashion, it was a long journey, but the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And as Laura mentioned, this year has been an incredible change for the industry, a tipping point. And I would say I would attribute a lot of that to the fact that the new generation and the millennials, and for those of you who have children and teenagers, they're growing up where, they're really disillusioned, and, they're learning about recycling, and they're learning about, how they can have more power in the choices that they're making to affect their own lives, and they're really engaged. And of course, with the power of social media and what we can create in terms of a movement where we can all connect our dots together, we can hold hands, we can join forces, and tell our stories together. I mean, what people don't realize is fashion, and one of the reasons that I've been so passionate about fashion as this vehicle is fashion is one of the leading causes of air and water pollution. In fact, as I mentioned yesterday, over 1 trillion kilowatt hours a year are used in the global fashion industry. 10% of the global carbon impact comes out of the textile industry. So it really makes a difference, the clothes you're buying, the bedding that you're buying, looking at companies, brands that actually are looking at their supply chains, trying to minimize energy, minimize water, waste, chemical use, and look at social justice in their supply chains as well. I was in Hong Kong a handful of years ago with a girlfriend of mine, and we were looking up at the sky, and she had said to me, "Wow, what a beautiful night. Can you believe how many stars are out?" And I looked up, and there were like 2 stars in the sky, and I had just come from Oregon from like a full moon canoe ride, and there were thousands of stars, and I said, "That's very sad." She said, "Well, the only reason there's so many stars tonight is because the textile factories are closed today." And I was like, whoa. So, this is really happening around the world and even in our own backyards. I've been from the beginning really in the trenches also in the authenticity and the transparency of this movement. It's paramount that we have, credible sources that we know to look to, like the GOTS standard, the Global Organic Textile Standard, or Ecotex, or understand the Higgs Index, which is driven by the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. 85% of the apparel companies in the world have come together in a very exciting collaboration to measure those impacts in their supply chains. so we're seeing a lot of really, really exciting progress and innovation. Recycled poly, where a company last year called Unify took 900 million plastic bottles out of our landfills to break it down and turn it into their Reprieve yarns. So there are just amazing, amazing things going on. And this year, one of the reasons that there was a big shift was that we celebrated for the first year on April 24th something called Fashion Revolution Day, where a grassroots movement of eco-fashion leaders and consumers came together to make that statement and say, we need to ask the question, who's making our clothes? Where are our clothes being made? How are they being made? And that campaign, which was #InsideOut, was the #1 global trend on Twitter, and 58 countries around the world came together to celebrate Fashion Revolution Day. So this is just the beginning in that journey. Relatively speaking, we're still at our infancy, but everyone in this room and everyone on the planet relates to clothing or bedding, and so we have to, as Betsy said, we have to vote with our dollars. We have to make a difference and think about those products in the fashion and textile industry that we're supporting. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. And so, Leilani, how does it feel to be voted the #1 eco athlete in the world?
That was an honor. That was Discovery Channel that named me that, and it felt really good. You know, I've been working at this stuff for a long time. I've been racing since 2001, but my background is actually, I have a degree in biology from the University of California in San Diego. And around 2006, when I saw a movie called An Inconvenient Truth, that was sort of the reality check for me of this is something urgent that we need to address. And being a race car driver, I have this amazing 200-mile-per-hour billboard that I can use to send messages and hopefully influence these, 75 million fans that are out there watching our races. So I have been using my car since 2006 to carry messages about clean energy, wind power, solar power. I recently ran a car at Daytona that was promoting 100% renewable energy. I just got back from racing at Chicagoland Speedway in a car promoting solar power. And on that weekend also became the first race car driver to ever completely power my pit box off of solar power. Thank you. The other thing that I did that was kind of different was I became the first race car driver to actually get to a race without burning any oil. So I drove my Tesla Model S all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I utilized the Tesla Supercharger network. And I drove all the way to my race at Chicago, so it was 1,300 miles. And then I raced around the track, and then I drove 1,300 miles home. But the reason that I'm doing these things is to sort of set an example to the race fans, to let them know that this is something that's possible now. Long electric road trips are something that everybody can do. And because I sort of have a voice as a unique presence in racing, not just as a woman in an obviously male-dominated sport, but also as an environmentalist, they're paying attention to these things that I'm doing. So I try to set a good example. I'm vegan, I compost all my food scraps, I've got an electric car, I have solar panels on my roof, so whenever I'm at home in Charlotte, I'm actually driving off of sunshine. And then when I go to the racetrack, I'm using my race car to sort of call to action people to support clean, renewable energy and to make them more aware of the realities of climate change. I love coming to events like this because it's nice to be around people who, you guys get me. You guys are my people. You guys are tree huggers like me. So you understand where I'm coming from. But I also feel like when I come to these events, I'm preaching to the choir. And while it's great to sort of get the energy that I get when I come here, I also realize that the most difference that I can make is actually at the racetrack. That is when I am engaging with the demographic of people that don't necessarily understand all of this. I've had race fans ask me, what do you mean when you talk about carbon footprint? I don't even know what that means. I think everybody here in the room takes it for granted that we know these things, but there's a lot of people out there that aren't involved in this world, and we need to engage them. So if we only run around and talk to people who believe in the same things that we do, then who is going to change the minds of those who don't? So my goal as a driver... So my goal as a driver is to sort of utilize that unique bridge that I have to connect the race fans to the environmentalists and to be a voice for the environmentalists at the racetrack. And so I maybe don't completely fit in both worlds, but for me, those worlds are endlessly intertwined, because the second that I get out of a race car, then I'm losing my ability to speak to 75 million people. And so I really look at it as an honor for me to get out there and bring this message to them where they're hanging out. They're not going to come to an environmental event in Aspen, Colorado. They are going to be at Daytona International Speedway when I race there in February. So we have to bring the message to them. Thanks. And just one more quick thing I want to say is about the vegan thing that you mentioned. So there's 7 billion people on the planet now, and if you eat meat, it takes 10 times more water and 10 times more land to make 1 calorie of protein from meat as it does from plants. It's essential that we cut back or completely give up our diet of eating meat. And I've been vegan now for 3 years, and I'm doing pretty good. So you can be vegan and be healthy. More greenhouse gas emissions come from raising animals for food than the entire transportation sector put together. So I look forward to the day when I come to our day. This is my 4th year here, and all the food being served is vegan.
So we're running a little behind, so Osprey, if you can just go through those slides as quickly as possible.
I'll go as fast as I can. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to the rest of the panel, because I love being with amazing women. And we're hearing all over the world from business leaders, government officials, indigenous elders. We're hearing from the Dalai Lama that this is the time of women's leadership. And I think that's something we really need to acknowledge, and one of the reasons it's wonderful to have this panel. And when we're talking about really our existence itself and protecting the web of life, I think there's something that's so important about women being able to represent that and be able to speak up for the fact of the urgency that we're having right now in terms of climate change and the need to protect all life. And women have an incredible power with our intergenerational understanding. There's a spiritual and an emotional component that women bring to the table that I think we really need right now. And I think that that's really showing up in our leadership circles. There's a lot of statistics also about why women are key to our leadership. And because of time, I'm not going to go through them. I encourage you to look at our website to learn about that. But as an example, 60 to 80% of all food produced in the world is done by women, especially in developing countries. 80% of all consumer purchases in North America are done by women. So when you start really collecting the power of women, it's amazing what we can do. And that's one of the reasons we really need to tap into that, and why we started the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, and our acronym is WeCan. We have a really interesting holistic approach to social change. We found that we need to really be full spectrum. So we do an educational component with women all over the world. We work with policy that is very urgent in different regions of the world. We also do hands-on trainings, because we believe that you've got to start from the ground. So we do a lot of work with indigenous women and grassroots women on food and energy and water issues. And then lastly, we actually get out there and do a lot of direct action on the streets, because we think we have to be a full spectrum social change movement. We also know that many people think that we have to move a lot in terms of political and collective will, because we know we have the solutions. There's been incredible conversation here about solutions, but where's the collective and political will? So, oops, where did that go? There we go. I lost one of my slides. Anyway, one of the things that's been really important that WeCan and many other organizations have been involved in is we've kept Keystone XL pipeline in the ground. 830,000 barrels of oil have stayed in the ground, and we need a final decision on it, but every day we have 830,000 barrels kept out of our atmosphere. 3 years ago, the pipeline was a done deal, and now it's not. We also know that the Joslyn oil sands mine has been shelved indefinitely. That's an $11 billion tar sands mine that's been canceled because of movement work. The TransCanada permit from Keystone has expired, And this was mentioned earlier. The World Council of Churches, which represents 590 million Christians worldwide, has agreed to divest. Just as a side note, it's excluded with unethical investments, including pornography, tobacco, and arms. I think interesting that divestment's on the same page as that. As many of you know, the solar industry has had record-shattering years. And I mention this because I've been approached by so many leaders in the solar industry who say, this is great, but the utilities are fighting back using their wealth and entrenched political power. So it's people power that needs to move the policy so we can get solar and wind and these other technologies into our homes. And that's where women and all movements can really make a big difference. So we're working on a campaign this year called Women for 100% Renewables, and we're going to be launching that in New York this September, because as many of you know, there's the UN Climate Summit that's going to be happening there, where world leaders are going to be coming together and discussing solutions. And we want every one of you here to meet us in New York, because we need to have hundreds of thousands of people on the streets, like we did for Earth Day years ago, to let our governments and world leaders know that this is an urgent crisis, and we need to show them in numbers and come out for the climate march on September 21st. We'll also be hosting a lot of events that week for women's leadership. We're going to bring a lot of Indigenous women leaders there as well, because they're on the front lines of this campaign. And we also hosted, as was mentioned earlier, a leadership summit of 100 women leaders from around the world, including Dr. Jane Goodall, Dr. Vandana Shiva, Sylvia Earle, who was here earlier, Cristiana Figueres, many women that we don't know their names, equally important from the grassroots and Indigenous leaders. And together we formulated, here's Jane Goodall and Vandana Shiva, some other leaders that were there. There's Laura. We also had Ted and others with us, many, as I said, Indigenous leaders. And we had two important documents that came out of that summit. One is the Women's Climate Declaration, which is in the hallway. We encourage you to sign that. We also formed the Women's Climate Action Agenda, which is a detailed analysis that we're going to be releasing in September, giving to ministers and world leaders about how we can stay below 2 degrees global temperature rise. And again, it's a full spectrum approach, and we encourage you all to get involved in reading that. It's about an 80-page document from women leaders around the world of what we can do. It's very progressive, very interesting, and I encourage you to participate in that. I'm going to quickly go through these. These are a lot of the actions from the last year that we've done with our international network. We worked with Eve Ensler from 1 Billion Rising, bringing women leaders together to do a rise on women and climate justice. We worked from the Maldives to Congo, all over the world, Latin America. We also do trainings. We've done on-the-ground trainings in the Middle East, North Africa region, working with rural women on the ground around food, water and energy issues. This is some of the women who participated. This was from our training. This is the fastest I've ever done this presentation. This is from the Congo, and we're working there to protect the rainforests and really work with Pygmy women, Indigenous women, about how they can protect their forests in their region. This is some more of that work. Really amazing women on the ground working there. They all got certificates after their training. We also work with women in the Amazon who are facing oil extraction on their property, on their territories, and it's just excruciating to see what's going on their lands. And it's one of the most important campaigns we have, is to really support Indigenous women protecting their territories. These are some of the women that are from the region that we work closely with, and them telling their own stories in this photo exhibit that we're going to be bringing to New York. Very powerful women who've been keeping oil companies out of their territories for years. Again, this is talking about the People's Climate March. We're mobilizing many, many people to come join us there. We hope you will join us as well. We advocate at the UN. And one of the most important things I also wanted to tell you is that we're having a summit in San Francisco called Economics of Sustainability. One of the programs we have is that we feel we cannot really get at the crux of the climate issue until we deal with our economic structures, and that we really need to talk in depth about this endless economic growth model and this extractive economy and how it's destroying people, and especially our Indigenous sisters and brothers who live on most of the biodiverse regions of our Earth. About 80% are in Indigenous people's hands. And we really need to bring in the grassroots and the Indigenous peoples who often experience a lot of the action and activities of people of the global North. This is our summit that we're having. We invite you all to participate in this. This will be happening September 18th, 19th, and 20th of next year in the run-up to the climate summit, the very, very important UN Climate Summit in December in Paris 2015. And we're going to be discussing these topics. We think it's very important to bring women leaders from all over the country in all different sectors together to really form a very powerful progressive strategy in this country. And we'll be starting national calls for that this November. And if anyone's interested, I'd love to have you participate with us. And thank you so much for your attention. We can.
That was as fast as I could go.
That was really well done, Osprey. I think we have a trailer for a film called Six queued up, and I'd like to roll the film. But I just want to tell you that Leilani is the covert getaway driver in a Tesla. It's all about the sixth extinction, and it's about the illegal trade of endangered species around the world. And it's just an amazing film. I saw the trailer the other night, and if you'll roll that, please.
What's happening now is unprecedented in Earth's history.
Why would we want to disrupt something that took billions of years to evolve?
We need to fight it on all fronts.
I think it's dawning on us now that this is the big one.
OPS is a group I formed. It uses covert operations to expose harmed endangered species. We're doing an order here. One bottle cam. Right there's the lens. 2 buttonhole cameras. Check 1, 2. Oh, that's good. Just about everything endangered in the world is for sale in China.
Look at this stuff. Endangered, highly endangered, highly endangered.
The more illegal it is, the more you have to go to the back rooms.
We're definitely not welcome here. Oh my gosh! There's things going on that are probably not safe to talk about. We're dumping so much carbon in the oceans it can't take it anymore.
We found this guy, Mr. Lee.
He's culling and processing whale sharks.
Nobody'd ever gotten a camera in there before.
We run into people with badges and uniforms, strip off all this stuff, throw it over a wall.
Is it a basking shark oil?
Jesus. This world is absolutely insane. Wildlife trade is second only to the drug market in the world. It's that lucrative. We need a getaway driver, and I knew one of the best.
I love it.
To create a heist, to hijack the world's attention.
I think we want to put in an order for a car today.
Excellent, we'll take one.
Blow the lid off this place, right?
We gotta go right now. There's been 5 major extinctions in the history of the planet.
This may be the 6th.
When you're talking about losing all of nature, it's not a spectator sport anymore. Everybody has to become active somehow. The idea is to inspire people.
Life wants to flourish. DNA wants to go forward. We need to be part of that.
People that have been in the business that don't even bother.
But better to light one candle than curse the darkness. There's so many people who sit back and say we're screwed. But you know what? That one candle, maybe someone else with a candle will find you. And I think that's where movements are started.
So Betsy, real quick.
Hello? I just wanted to say, for more information about It's Time 2015, the Partnership Summit, you can go to itstime2015.com and learn about it May 1st through 3rd, and also the Declaration of Interdependence is there, and we have flyers outside as well.
Marcy, quickly.
Just for more information of some of the great things going on in fashion, I produced a short film series. It's hosted on lstudio.com, which is Lexus. Lexus's content studio. And just Google or pull up, search Driving Fashion Forward. And it's pretty powerful, so I'd love to share it.
I thank you all. You awesome, incredible, passionate ladies. We're going to support you. We'll be there for you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And I just want to make one recognition of a very important woman in our midst. Her name is Paula Horn, and she's the wife of Chief Arvel Looking Horse, who we heard from this morning. And she is a Lakota singer, and she is also putting together the World Peace and Prayer Day, honoring sacred sites. And she's working with the UN Indigenous Peoples, and she is a true activist, and I just want to give her a round of applause for being here with us. And all of these ladies will be out in the foyer, so please go and talk to them and ask them any questions you may have, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. So now we have some logistics to take care of. They want everyone to clear the room so that they can set the tables and plate it and then come back